seen Pakistan really speed up and in a very, very urgent and maybe even desperate sort of way go and shore up its relations with many countries. This is a part of a three-pronged, if you like, effort to shore up its own defenses and reach out strategically to many countries that India is also reaching out to in separate ways. That moment has much more to do, perhaps, than what is happening in the Gulf than it does with South Asia and with India and Pakistan. This has more to do with Israel's attack on Qatar.
Has Pakistan scored a major strategic point over here after the Saudi Arabia-Pakistan defense agreement? What does it mean for India? What are the implications for India when it comes to India's new policy on an act of terror is an act of war when it comes to Pakistan? Will Saudi Arabia step in? To discuss all this and more, I'm being joined by Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor of The Hindu. Suhasini, thank you so much for joining us here on the network. Let's begin with what this agreement really means. Explain to our viewers, what does a defense agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan really mean, and what's the most important takeaway from this agreement?
Well, certainly, Geeta, the timing of the announcement is perhaps as important as the actual contents of the announcement. The joint defense, the mutual defense pact that Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed, of course, comes on the backs of more than 50 years of very close military ties between them. However, if you look at the actual agreement and certainly all the the kind of readouts that have been put out, the real operative part is the paragraph that says this agreement, which reflects the shared commitment of both nations to enhance their security, aims to develop aspects of defense cooperation between the two countries and strengthen joint deterrence against any aggression. Most importantly, it says the agreement states that any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. Now, certainly, this has been more or less said in the past, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan always seeing each other as brother countries. But when we saw that moment of Mohammed bin Salman and Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif actually, coming into an embrace and then signing this pact, it has an urgency because of the moment. And that moment has much more to do, perhaps, than what is happening in the Gulf than it does with South Asia and with India and Pakistan. But I think the impact will be felt quite strongly here as well.
Well, you speak of urgency, Suhasini, but the urgency is not from Saudi Arabia's part. It's from Pakistan, for Pakistan particularly. Current scenario, the fact that India has now come out with a policy, even if not stated officially, but certainly one where there is zero tolerance to terrorism emanating from Pakistan. In such a scenario, the urgency is on Pakistan's part. What really then made Saudi Arabia go ahead with such a pact that could impact in many ways than one India-Saudi Arabia ties?
Well, certainly it is possible to see it just from the Indian perspective on this, because obviously as soon as Pakistan gets involved in anything to do with strategy and defense, in New Delhi, planners, strategists do get interested, alarmed, and we've seen the Ministry of External Affairs' own statement saying we are studying this. We were aware that this kind of agreement was perhaps going to happen, but we are now studying the implications not only for India's national security, but for regional and global security. So a fairly strong statement coming from India. Normally, you wouldn't see an MEA response to an agreement between two other countries just like this. So the fact that the MEA has responded means that the government believes that India is impacted by the Pakistan-Saudi agreement. Now, you spoke about Pakistan's need post-Operation Sindoor. And certainly we have seen Pakistan really speed up and in a very, very urgent and maybe even desperate sort of way go and shore up its relations with many countries. You saw the Pakistani outreach to the US directly after Operation Sindoor, nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. also saying that, Asim Munir, the field marshal there, having lunch with President Trump. So we certainly saw a kind of, an outreach over there from Pakistan, and then that was reciprocated by the US. With China as well, we have seen Pakistan, and of course during Operation Sindoor as well, China's support to Pakistan quite critical, and then Pakistan's been very grateful for the support it got. And most recently, we saw President Zardari go to Pakistan to China just after Prime Minister Modi was there, and also look at military facilities and things that Pakistan can buy. So this is a part of a three-pronged, if you like, effort to shore up its own defenses and reach out strategically to many countries that India is also reaching out to in separate ways. But Geeta, again, I would like to come back to the idea that the timing of this agreement has a little more to do with what is happening in the Gulf than it has to do with South Asia, simply because it comes days after Israel's targeting of.
Absolutely.
I don't think it was perhaps read quite as strongly in New Delhi immediately after that attack. And of course, Israel said it was bombing a house that contained Hamas leadership. The son of one of the Hamas negotiators was killed. But the fact was that this changed the paradigm. So far, we have seen Israel target countries outside of the Gulf. So Iran, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Tunisia, have been targeted by Israel in all these in all these attacks over the last 2 years, especially since October 7th. But now you see Israel attacking a Gulf country that houses the largest U.S. base. This is CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command's forward headquarters. It is also a country that has U.S. Security guarantees, and despite all that, Israel not only targeted that home in Doha, it doesn't seem to have received any penalties from the US for it. So a huge rift really in Gulf US ties as well, not just about Israel's war on Gaza and turmoil
Absolutely.
with the Gulf.
Right, but Suhasini, I'd like to turn the question around a little in terms of urgency and Saudi Arabia, because Qatar and Saudi Arabia are very different in terms of Gaza and what's happened in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Also, we saw Saudi Arabia not taking the kind of position the Arab world's leading country should have taken or could have taken, and in that very unlikely that Israel would be attacking Saudi Arabia, but more likely that there could be with all the conflict that we're seeing, there could be if there are heightened tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and in that, having a nuclear Pakistan, the only Muslim country to have nuclear weapons on your side, certainly will bode well for you. Could that be one of the reasoning for Saudi Arabia to go ahead?
Well, Geeta, there are all these traditional positions. You know, the original idea that Saudi Arabia's real threat is from Iran. Its challenger is Iran. That Pakistan, despite being an Iranian neighbor, has always had these close ties with Saudi Arabia as a result of it. And I think you can look at even the irony of the fact that a few years ago, when Saudi Arabia and Qatar completely cut ties between each other and practically went to war with each other. You saw at that time Pakistan actually refusing to send its troops in that intra-Gulf conflict. And a big rift between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan over that. But I think despite all these traditional and very, very old fault lines as well as alliances between all these countries, Geeta, it is necessary to see what's happened in the immediate preamble to this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Obviously, an agreement like this is negotiated over months, if not years. The timing of the announcement, however, comes, if you just look at the days that preceded it, the Israel attack on Doha. Then Qatar hosts an extraordinary session of the OIC and the Arab League. 60 countries come together, including Pakistan's leadership, but also Indonesia, other countries, all come together there. Pakistan's prime minister actually speaks about the idea of an Islamic NATO for the first time.
Absolutely.
Regardless of the fact that did not go into their final document, what we did see is the GCC countries, Gulf Cooperation Council countries, coming together and talking about a joint defense mechanism for the first time. Remember, across the Middle East and especially in the Gulf region, America has very carefully made its ties with each of these countries. There are 30 to 40,000 US troops in various countries, whether it's Al Udeid, as I said, in Qatar is the largest, but then there is in Saudi Arabia, you have bases in Bahrain, in Jordan, in Kuwait, across that region. And they are now coming together saying, we don't think the US is going to guarantee our security if Israel decides that someone from Hamas is here and they can bomb one of us. A sense of unity amongst countries that have not always, as you pointed out just now, has not always been united. So that as well happened. And so if you put all of these things together, the fact that the US then did send out, Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff to the region to try and calm things down, but eventually did not issue any kind of real rebuke to Israel.
Not at all, because he went from Tel Aviv to these countries, just makes no difference. Look at the statements Marco Rubio made on Israeli soil.
Exactly, and fully justifying what Israel has done. But also, I think it's necessary for your viewers to look at how India reacted. India's reaction to what happened in Qatar is in stark contrast to India's reaction to the Israeli bombings of Yemen, of Lebanon, of the Pager bombs in Lebanon, of all the other countries in the region, Syria, Tunisia, all these other countries that Israel has been bombing. We saw muted responses from New Delhi, expressing concern even over Iran, but essentially not going beyond that. In this case, you saw one statement from the Ministry of External Affairs. You saw Prime Minister Modi pick up the phone, speak to the Qatari Emir, denounce what he called a violation of Qatari sovereignty. This is the first time we've heard such harsh words being used by the Modi government for Israel during this part of the conflict. And then an MEA readout on that came out with extremely strong words, India's condemnation of what Israel has done. And then we even saw at the Human Rights Council, India's representative stand up and condemn what Israel has done. So obviously in Delhi too, these events are being watched very closely. And the impact of what Israel did in terms of bombing Qatar. And let's remember, despite the fact that we know Qatar has housed the Hamas leadership for years, this is something that has been known to the US and Israel for years as well. Of course, Qatar also provided that platform for negotiations. Many of those who were being targeted had come there to discuss the US's own ceasefire proposal for Gaza. So in a sense, it seemed not only as a targeting of a Gulf country, but also a betrayal. And the idea that when the chips were down, the US would stand only with Israel. And when the chips were down for Israel, it will put its own war on Hamas, its war against Palestinian people as its priority over any kind of regional stability. So there's a lot of very quick recalibrations, if you like, that have happened over the past week since the September 9th attacks on Doha.
Okay, we are completely running out of time, but I have two very important questions to ask you, Suhasini. One, for somebody with the institutional memory that you have explained to us, the Saudi-Pakistan relationship, not just in terms of how Raheel Sharif headed their joint coalition force on counterterrorism, but also the fact that when Musharraf wanted to jail Nawaz Sharif, it was Saudis who intervened. The Sharif-Saudi relationship as well. Do you think all these factors also played in when Saudi Arabia was deciding that this is the moment in time for Saudi Arabia to really connect and have this pact with Pakistan? And also the fact that could Saudi Arabia have gone ahead with such a decision without a go-ahead from America, its net security provider? Distrust aside.
That last question is a very, very important one, because is it possible that the US, which did express some amount of discomfort with what Israel is doing, is trying to balance it out by turning a blind eye or not really responding? to Pakistan and the and Saudi Arabia getting this mutual defense pact. Perhaps the US quarterbacked it at some point, given that we know for a fact that President Trump was in Riyadh a few months ago. He has had these very close conversations with the Pakistani army chief, the Field Marshal Munir, as well as a sort of open dialogue now going on with Pakistan. The fact is, India has had strong relations with Saudi Arabia over these last few years, but it really began maybe in 2006 with the India-Saudi Arabia Strategic Partnership Declaration. Long before that, in the 1970s, after in fact, the 71 war, where Pakistan's military was decimated, its resources were decimated, it was Saudi Arabia that really helped Pakistan to rebuild and funded many things in Pakistan. So over the next few years, we saw them sign many pacts on the defense sphere. One of those pacts involves Pakistan actually training Saudi military officers. So there's a close link over there. Another part, and you spoke about that with Raheel Sharif, involves Pakistan deputing its military officers in Saudi Arabia. And that has happened as well. General Bajwa, all of them have been awarded in Saudi Arabia at various times, have been used for specific operations or strategic support. The third, which is not spoken about, but has always been hinted at, is some kind of Pakistani support or assistance to Pakistan's nuclear program. While we know that the components have come from North Korea and China has quarterbacked that program in many ways, and the original reactors, it is the Saudi help that had made it sound like the Pakistani nuclear facilities and its resources were building what was called the Islamic bomb. And in a book a few years ago, Bob Woodward had actually quoted Lindsey Graham, the US senator, saying that Graham had been told by Mohammed bin Salman in a conversation when he said, "Are you looking to create your own nuclear weapon?" And you remember this was a big event when Saudi Arabia was looking at nuclear power, because it said if Israel gets a nuclear bomb, so will we. And he said, I can use Pakistani support for nuclear facilities, nuclear power. When he's pressed about a bomb, a weapon, he says, well, I can always buy one from Pakistan. And this has been the kind of whisper, if you like, always, that there is some kind of understanding between the two countries there. So that's the background of this conversation. Now, of course, India has had a strong strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia. In fact, the day the Pahalgam attacks occurred, Prime Minister Modi was strengthening that strategic partnership. He was in Riyadh at that time. But this relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan really does go way back, which is why, while many here would be surprised by the announcement of that mutual defense pact, it really is built on a much longer relationship.
Right. And finally, before I let you go, Suhasini, many in India believed after Operation Sindoor that Pakistan is isolated. We saw the SCO summit, we saw the military parade in Beijing, and we are seeing all of the engagements between Pakistan and world leaders. And now we're looking at this pact between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. India Today Global over here has been reporting on how Pakistan has not been isolated, much to the chagrin of many people here in India. Your take on, is Pakistan isolated? What does this pact tell you?
Well, I think with a country of Pakistan's size, it would be delusional for India to think that it will just disappear. India has so many challenges from Pakistan. It couldn't come from a country that is weak or will just disappear overnight. Secondly, I think Pakistan makes its security, especially as it keeps talking about, having its particular geography and having no strategic depth. It makes its security its main purpose. All of its resources go into its military. All of its resources internationally go into its strategic defense. So what you've seen post-Operation Sindoor is Pakistan asserting that once again, making sure it's shoring up its strategic partnerships and friends. There's another part to it, which is Pakistan is one of those countries that has had at various times offered, to countries what perhaps other countries would not offer in terms of their own sovereignty. The US has been able in the late 2000s to land and take off from Pakistani bases and bomb Pakistanis. in areas in Waziristan and Balochistan and other places. That's not something other countries would perhaps allow. Others have used Pakistan as a kind of convenient base or a convenient place. China's Pakistan Economic Corridor is its way of reaching the seas there. So in that sense, Pakistan has made itself amenable to a lot of countries, as it has with Saudi Arabia as well. It really would not be very realistic to assume that, given all that Pakistan has spent and invested in building up these resources, that those would go suddenly. But Geeta, I would come back to the point that this has more to do with Israel's attack on Qatar and the situation in the Gulf. Even if Saudi Arabia has not spoken against Israel, even if the Abraham Accords have not been rescinded, the Arab street and the street in the Gulf countries in particular, the kingdoms in particular, which are sensitive to this kind of popular perception, have really been set on fire by Israel's constant bombardment of Gaza, killing of 65,000 civilians. In those 65,000, 20,000 are believed to be children. The UN's own commissioners are calling it a genocide, apart from other groups. Imagine the impact of that right there in the Gulf. And then you add to it the idea that Israel is now also targeting one of the Gulf countries. It has caused a huge upheaval, if you like, in the thinking, in the sense of security in that region. And that should not be discounted when we're talking essentially. Obviously, India is going to be impacted, and India is studying how it will be affected, basically. But I think this is something that must be kept in mind, that it is this situation with Israel, with Gaza, and then the attacks in the region that have really brought it to a head.
Suhasini Haidar, thank you so much for adding clarity to this multi-layered story. Thank you.